on this computer. Okay, so welcome today to the Chakra Way podcast, the Chakra Way meditation podcast. Listen, I am so excited. That's why I can't. Got too many words coming out of my mind. I'm talking rubbish. I'm going to start again. Slow down, Roseanne.
Insane.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, welcome today to the Chakra Way meditation podcast. And today I am really excited for this guest because we are talking today with Aaron, who is Yogi Aaron, who is a yoga teacher, not surprisingly. Yogi Aaron has a yoga retreat in Costa Rica, which looks stunningly beautiful. He's also an author. And his main book, and there's another book which I also want to get into at some point, Aaron, but the main book that I want to talk about is a book that he's called Stop Stretching. Now, as a yoga teacher, this is controversial. First of all, welcome, Aaron. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for taking the leap and having me come.
Oh no, I'm so fascinated because I feel like yoga is this beautiful ancient thing that's been passed down through generations. And here in the West, we've kind of taken lots of different sort of pathways that you can go with your yoga. You could do Kundalini, or you could do Ashtanga, or you could do hot yoga, or you can just do generic Hatha yoga. I personally was trained in Iyengar yoga. But it's constantly developing and we're constantly learning. And I think that, I don't know, talking from an Iyengar standpoint, Mr. Iyengar came over and said, straighten that knee, thwack. He was like, he was quite full on. And so that sort of runs a little bit through that type of yoga. And ditto, it's the same with other variations, I'm sure. So I love that you're bringing yoga forward. So tell me, tell me,
why should we stop stretching?
Yes. Why?
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on. And I love like the chakras. So when I saw your podcast, I was like, oh my God, we got to have a conversation because I'm just going to do a quick commercial for the chakras because when I first met my teacher, Rod, he gave me a chakra practice. And it was that chakra practice that I believe led me to opening up, my life, essentially, like opening up a yoga retreat center and writing a couple of books. And I really believe strongly that the chakra practices are really such a key element that is not really being taught well, which is another conversation, but or there's not a lot of knowledge of it really, and as a result, it's not being taught well. And so I love that people like you are doing this work and helping people to manifest and live their life purpose. And maybe, who knows, maybe some of the people you teach will open up a yoga retreat center or do amazing stuff. And I think like that's what yoga is supposed to be about, is like opening up our potential. And I got into yoga initially because I wanted to stretch. I was 18 at the time. I was really tight in my body. And I was also like very ADD and very energetic. So I was drawn more to quote unquote the energetic kind of practices, I guess, the power yoga, Ashtanga yoga. I used to be a huge Ashtangi. And very quickly, at a very young age, I started hurting my back, like really badly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and what started happening was I would go to yoga teachers, say, oh my God, my back is sore. Well, we need to open your hips, or we need to stretch your back out. And really, for the following 25 years, I kept doing that. And then things just progressively got worse. And silly me never kind of connected the dots that maybe the yoga was I shouldn't really say the yoga because that's not fair or correct.
But the
It
way
was
that
really
you were using your
stretching.
body,
The way
yeah.
that the stretching, the forcing open. And a lot of yoga teachers might listen to this and go, well, you're not supposed to force your body open. We don't teach that. Yes, you do. We all teach it. We all sat there at the front of the room saying, like, yoga is not about stretching. And then we fold forward over our legs, bringing our forehead to our knees and grabbing our ankles.
Yeah.
Like, there's such a disconnect between what yoga teachers say and what yoga teachers do. And what we do is more, that's what students pay attention to. They don't hear what we say, they hear or they watch what we do, and they try to mimic that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of like what started my pain journey. And then I ended up in the surgeon's office, the orthopedic surgeon who was telling me, like, you're going to probably need a spinal fusion in your lower back,
Oh.
because my lower back was just a mess. And it was a mess because none of the muscles down there were working properly. And I didn't know that at the time, but I didn't realize, like, all of the stretching I was doing was actually debilitating my muscles.
Okay. So what you're saying, what I think I'm hearing is that the stretching, you're overstretching the muscles without giving them any strength. Was that the problem with your back? Is that the problem with stretching? Is just because when you teach yoga, it's like, when you pick up a heavy weight, you kind of, you tense your muscle, you shorten the muscle, add bulk to it, you shorten the muscle.
Sure.
Whereas in yoga, we're doing the opposite. We're lengthening the muscle, which
Yes.
in theory gives space and fluidity and flexibility and all that kind of good stuff that most yogis are after. So what is it about? So take your example, because this is a really common one, is lower back issue.
Yeah.
Is it what was the actual problem then, if from the overstretching that you were doing?
So whenever we stretch, we push a muscle beyond what its end range of motion is. So each muscle has a capacity to shorten. Okay. And that's really what I now focus on. And we can circle back to that in just a moment. But I focus more on the muscles that are shortening. And as a reciprocal response, another muscle will always lengthen. Okay. And that sometimes people call that a stretch. I don't like calling it a stretch because it denotes this idea that I can force it to go more open. You never, ever, ever want a muscle to be forced open. I'm going to explain why in a second. But when we shorten a muscle, there's always a reciprocal muscle, an antagonist that will lengthen. And so if we just force the antagonist, the opposite muscle, to lengthen without getting the other muscle to contract properly, then we disconnect the brain from that muscle. We lose proprioception. And an example of that is, like, if you just ask people, like, hang out in child's pose for a minute and now jump up and stand up, they're going to be like, oh, because their muscles have lost their force output. Their muscles have lost that ability to contract and contract on demand. So they no longer have the ability to shorten. You can think about it like a slinky. If you have a new slinky out of the box and you say to a little child, like, grab one end and run away as far as you can, and you pull that slinky and extend it as much as you can. In our muscles, we have what's called muscle spindles. They're all like little tiny micro slinkies, literally. And so those slinkies, those spindles, are talking to our brain all the time. Their job is actually to contract. Their job is not to be stretched. Okay. Their job is to contract. Now, they will elongate, obviously, but their main job is to contract. And so they're constantly communicating with their brain. If they are stretched, they lose that ability to connect to the brain, and they lose their ability to contract and contract on demand. If you keep doing these kinds of practices for long enough, you ultimately create a huge amount of instability in the body, and whereby it takes that much longer, sometimes hours, sometimes days, for the brain to reconnect to that muscle. So you can think like if you leave a really kind of yin, stretchy kind of yoga class and you're all like loosey-goosey, you
Yeah.
have no stability in your joints. So you go and do something, then you hurt yourself. And so then that creates a stress and a trauma in the body. And then what do? You go and stretch more, which is
Mm.
then, disassociating the brain from those muscles a lot more.
Okay, so this really does makes perfect sense to me. I get it. I get what you're saying. And what you're saying is that like you're losing that stability, that strength. It's all very well having lovely long muscles, but if they
Yeah,
can't contract and be short, which is what gives us stability in that kind of weight trainery kind of a way, or then you're going to end up with the tendons and the ligaments trying to hold your skeleton together rather than your muscles, and then that's where the issues come. And also the muscles and the tendons and ligaments that are holding the skeleton in place are going to not be doing their job. So yeah, and that's when we
can I ask you something as a yoga
yeah,
teacher? And you don't have to answer, or you can answer if you want to, but this is kind of like a rhetorical question as well. So take it for what it's worth. But I think that the most two important questions that yoga teachers don't ask often enough, and that's kind of what I want to create a conversation about in the yoga world, is the first question is, why do we need long muscles, like what how come we need to have these long muscles? And that's the first question. The second question is, why is the muscle tight to begin with? Like why is there muscle tightness? And I think a lot of yoga teachers don't stop to ask that. Do you want to answer, or do you want me to keep
well,
talking?
no, I think it is a really interesting question, and actually it's a very good question to pose, because it's one of those things where I'm sure I used to know the answer. It's this why we want to have long muscles. But I don't think that I have a decent enough answer to give you something solid on that.
Yeah,
And why do we have tight muscles? Well, I suppose a lot of people would say, well, tight muscles are stress, and there's tension, and it's gripping and it's holding. And what we want to do is create space and ease and flow and fluidity in the body.
yeah.
So, like mind, like body, all of that kind of stuff. So that, I suppose, is my off the hoof answer on those two questions. Yeah.
I mean, it's great. It's good. And but those like so from a from and this is one of my passions, is I really want to start bringing some knowledge of muscle function to yoga teachers. and
Because we're
and
all
and
taught anatomy, we're all taught
yeah,
anatomy, we're taught where the muscles are and what they attach to what, and
yeah.
so on. But there's more that needs to be discussed. You're right.
Well, and I think one of the things that's not taught, and in both the yoga world and other worlds, by the way, is that a muscle's job is to do two things. One, move bones. Okay, so in order for me to bring my hand, if I extend my arm out and then I bring my wrist to my shoulder, what is moving that forearm? Well, there's the bicep. There's a few muscles, but there's all the bicep muscles that's doing that. They need to shorten in order for me to bring my hand to my shoulder. So muscles move bones. That's really important. And they move bones by contracting. They move bones by shortening. They also stabilize joints. So we have our shoulder joints, we have our hip joints, knee joints, and then all of the vertebrae in our back. And so if those muscles are, as you said, all lengthened and open and spacious, they're no longer able to contract to be able to hold those joints in place.
Do their job. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so that's why, like, I can't tell you, Roseanne, how many times I have thrown my back out. I'm doing air quotes right now for the podcast listeners. The to when I'm started yoga class, like I've started in child's pose and stretched my back out a little, and then started in Surya Namaskar A. And by sometimes the second, third time, I've like my back goes out, like my lower back seizes up,
Yeah.
because none of the muscles that were supposed to be supporting those joints were engaging properly. They lost their force output.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so that's what, so I no longer focus on lengthening muscles in my teaching. And that's part of like flipping the script that I keep talking about throughout my book, is like flipping the script, but don't focus on lengthening, focus on shortening. So if you come into Trikonasana, for example, like, and there's a misstep in one of the instructions. So when you come into Trikonasana, side bending pose, they always say, open up the side body that you're quote unquote stretching into, and then even lengthen on the side that you're bending into. No, we actually want to shorten that side. And don't worry about what's going on lengthening here. Just shorten these muscles. The boon of Trikonasana is actually the engagement of the oblique muscles if it's taught properly. From that perspective, from that lens. And so if you're engaging those, then you can start to engage the oblique muscles, which are huge muscles that are responsible for trunk and spine stability. But if you ask people to come out, lengthen out, even throw the hips out a little bit and bring the arm down to the floor, you almost can watch people drop down to the floor. There's no muscular engagement. And then when people come out of it, it's like they either kind of fly out of it using fast twitch muscles, or they kind of like stumble out of it because none of those stabilizer muscles are able to engage properly. So from our perspective, we're always looking at what muscles are shortening in order for the body to move that direction.
Oh my God, this is such a fascinating perspective, because I can totally understand it. But I've been, forever, I've been, lengthen from the hip to the armpit, find that length and extend out. And then, to come out of it, it's like the energy is in that back leg. So use the back leg and the top arm to like lift you up out of it. And so you're not sort of hauling yourself, but you're sort of, got that energy. But this is a really, really interesting perspective on this whole thing. So you kind of answered my next question, which was going to be, so how do we practice yoga, the traditional type of so take Paschimottanasana, full forward bend. Do you practice that? How far do you go? How do you practice something like, which is a big old stretch?
So the first answer, I did sort of answer your question, but the first answer is like, what is shortening? So always kind of flip the script in your mind. What muscles need to shorten in order for me to do that movement? And how can I isometrically engage those muscles? So with Trikonasana, it's very easy, or even as I'm sitting on the ground right now, I'm doing a variation of a lateral pose here. So that's one answer. With Paschimottanasana, so there's kind of two ideas, but first of all, the way that I teach it, or teach teachers to teach it, is think about, again, what muscles are shortening. Let's do some activations. Let's do some preparation to get those muscles to shorten. So in Paschimottanasana, we have the quads, more specifically the rectus femoris, and hip flexors. So we can even address a little bit of the psoas, the iliacus, not so much TFL, but definitely the quads. And then we're also looking at what muscles are in the trunk of the body. So we're looking at the rectus abdominis, the sternalis. So what we want to do in the psoas minor, and we want to do some things to prepare those muscles to be able to shorten in a better way. And just by the way, I had this woman in my teacher training last April. She was so great. I actually interviewed her for my podcast, which is titled Stop Stretching. And it's just an 8-part mini series. So it's not like a whole enchilada weekly thing. Okay. But I was listening to her interview before class one day, and she was like, I'm doing yoga because I want to touch my toes. I've never been able to touch my toes, and I just want to touch my toes. So I came into class and I said, Mary, I joke with my students like that. Do you really think it's important to touch your toes? Why do you want to touch your toes? And there's no real answer. Well, I just want to.
Yeah,
I mean, so
exactly.
there's this kind of like, thing in our mind that, like, oh, if I'm going to be healthier and more vital and more youthful if I can touch my toes.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
then I
so
got her up on the table. Sorry.
no, no, it's just on that, just whilst it's still in my brain before I forget it. So this the whole thing about touching your toes. That's hamstring length to greater or lesser degree, pretty much late greater. So it's hamstring length, so length in the back of the legs. So a lot of people find really challenging. Like I've got a student who I was teaching this morning, a private client, who's really stiff. His knees are not great, and he's stiff. You know, his hamstrings are short, which is very typical of a man of his age. You know, not a problem. We work around it. It's all good. Um, but I've always believed and been taught that if you have that long hamstring, then that connects up to the lower back and allows the lower back to be freer and allows the lower back to be released and less prone to injury. And you're blowing my world up here, Aaron, by saying that this is not the case. This is as that's yeah.
I
So
want to come
for
back and
people,
talk about the hamstring for a second, but I wanted to just quickly tell you that with Mary, we got her up, and I actually I had a video recording of it, and I had her reach out and not try to grab her feet, but just keeping her arms level with her legs, reach as far as she could. She got about 6, 8 inches away from her toes, which she actually said, like, oh my God, like, I can't believe I'm actually that close.
yeah,
The work we've been doing is helping. But then I led her through a simple activation for her pyramidalis, which is it's kind of like an anchor muscle for the whole abdominal wall. So I got her pyramidalis activated, and she actually got her fingers up to her toes. Then we went back and did 2 more exercises, one of them to activate the quads, and she got her fingers about 4 to 6 inches past her toes.
wow.
We did not stretch at all. So we opened up a range of motion, but here's the cool thing. We not only opened up a huge range of motion, which, she was happy about, but we actually had stability. And so she opened up that range of motion because her muscles were able to shorten properly. That's the important thing, is
Mm.
that and so how I would teach Paschimottanasana, by the way, is I would not use straps. I would not tell people to grab the feet. I would bring the hands behind the back and tell people to come forward as far as they can. And I would have them, depending on how long we stay in the pose. I mean, it's a great pose to stay in for a while, because of the effects on the mind and the nervous system and that sort of thing. So that's another conversation. But I generally, when I'm teaching like forward bends, I always take release valves out so that people cannot go into their flexibility.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And you asked a question, I was going to come back and answer it. Sorry.
sorry, I'm bombarding
Oh, it
you.
was. It's cool stuff, though. It really is cool stuff to see it. But again, the hamstrings, let's talk about that for a second. The hamstrings are so important for hip stability, but also for knee stability. And what is one of the huge complaints that yoga teachers, yoga people always have is, my knees are hurting. Oh, well, we need to stretch more. But actually, if you look at where the hamstrings attach to, they're really responsible for knee flexion. And if the knees are flexing and the hamstrings aren't shortening, again, the joint isn't stabilizing properly. The joint is just kind of like loosey-goosey. So I would, with this particular individual, look at, okay, well, why is his hamstrings tight? Well, the hamstrings are tight, because it's a protective mechanism in the body. So, where you live in England, you can think about, like, you step out the door on the first day, the cold day of winter, maybe there's some ice on the ground and you step on it. What does your body do? It tightens up,
Yeah.
or when you get scared, you tighten up. So the body it's a protective mechanism, that when the body senses instability, it sends out like an amber alert, tighten up, tighten up, tighten up,
Yeah.
because what it's trying to do is to keep the joints safe, to keep
Yeah.
the joints stabilized.
But with
And
this
then
individual, the reason being is probably because his knees are pretty shot. So
yeah,
he's been told that in a few years' time, he's probably going to need a pair of new knees, which is,
yeah.
but so his hamstrings are tight to protect his knees. Therefore, yeah.
Well, and sure. And so what some of the main muscles that protect knees and actually contribute to knee stability is we want to address the glutes, we want to address the quads, and we also want to address the psoas. Those are sort of my top three muscles to, help knee stability. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, I'm a huge hiker. I love hiking. And by the age of like 31, 32, I actually had to stop for a long time because I would go hiking and then I would be debilitated for days afterwards because my knees were so swollen. And so I slowly started to get into it, but I always had to wear a knee brace. But when I started doing muscle activations, I would do things for my knees.
Mm.
And now I don't wear a knee brace anymore because I make sure like these muscles are strong that are supposed to that really affect the stability of the knee joint when I'm out there. So I would with your client really work on getting his glutes working and getting his psoas working properly, and also rectus femoris and TFL too. TFL is another one. It's constantly tight on a lot of people, and the solution is not foam rolling. It feels good. This kind of lengthening process that you were talking about earlier, it feels good. It does feel
Yeah.
good. It does feel in the brain or in the mind, spacious, which is what we're trying to create. But the problem is that we're creating that space and there's no accountability. There's no stability
Yeah.
afterwards. And then the other thing is like we have to keep doing it over and over and over because those muscles will eventually tighten up because the body doesn't sense stability.
Mm.
So you're just perpetuating like this cycle of instability.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean you're really making me think because before we met, I just hopped onto Amazon to have a look at your book, and rather brilliantly, you've got that look inside, which I always look inside a book. Oh, just a little bit of free book, happy days. So I was reading the introduction, and I got as far as a story about a student that you was talking about, who had sciatica, like true sciatica, with a trapped nerve in his spine. And you were saying that, the thing that he really loved doing was that, what you call figure of four, what I would call reclining pigeon pose.
Sure.
Um, and you were like, no, that's not what you need to do. And I'm like, oh, because that's me. In 2020, I was doing, when we were in lockdown, and I was like, great, I'm just going to do yoga all day, every day, because there's nothing else to do. So I would jump on Zoom and do class after class after, I was teaching in California and all over the world, and I was teaching all of my classes plus more. I was doing a lot. And then a load of other things. Anyway, at some point I developed sciatica, and it wasn't a trapped nerve sciatica. It was piriformis, sort of in the muscle, in the bum muscle, sciatica. And I find that's that reclining pigeon has been my best friend, and Supta Padangusthasana, lifting, stretching the hamstring. And now you're making me think that I've got it all wrong. And it's that was 2020. We're nearly in 2023 now, and I can still feel the echoes of it. And occasionally it comes back and bites me on the bottom, quite literally, and I'm not enjoying it. And currently I have got a little bit of pain through my outer, on that outer leg sort of thing. And so now I hadn't got, because it was then time to meet you, I was like, oh my God, I need to read on, which is what I'm going to read. But instead, I'm going to ask you, what do I do? I mean, nobody wants to hear about how I sort out my sciatica, but I'm going to get your book to read it and to find out. But it does make sense that I've been pushing it and pushing it and stretching it and stretching it, and it's still not getting better. or it's, you know, it's not disappeared, as you know. And there's a huge amount of shame and frustration as a yoga teacher when you have something like this. You're like, why the hell can't I fix myself, because I have all the tools here. And this leads me on really to what I wanted to talk to you about, which is like being, you know, this pain, being pain free, because that's the big sort of consequence of this stop stretching, is being pain free. And I think if somebody, you know, if somebody's been listening to this and they're not a yogi, they may well have tuned out already. But if you haven't, then you know, a lot of us suffer with pain. And so this technique of yoga, because I meet a lot of people and you say, what do you do? And you say, I'm a yoga teacher. And they go, oh, I'm far too inflexible. I couldn't possibly do yoga. That's the most common thing. And then they say, oh, well, I've got a bad knee, or I've got this bit that hurts, or that bit that hurts. And so therefore I don't do yoga. And so I feel like you're coming up with the solutions to these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, pain is always a response of inflammation. So with yoga teachers, just as a side note, we often feel pain. Like if I feel pain in my shoulder right here, and right where I'm pointing to is the bicep tendon, right in here. And so a lot of yoga teachers end up having a lot of inflammation right here. Inflammation, pain is like the check engine light of the body. The body is, it's like there's something that's going on here. There's inflammation here. There's a tightness here because something isn't working properly. And so what we as yoga teachers do then is, you know, oh, you need to stretch that out. And so I used to suffer terribly. It was all from those darn chaturangas and other things.
God, hate that pose. Yes.
and and so what we need to do is like address it, like what is not stabilizing there. And so inflammation will always happen when there's no stabilization. The body starts to experience more stress or trauma or overuse. So chaturanga is a great example in our yoga world of something where we're really traumatizing, and I'm choosing that word specifically, our shoulders. We are traumatizing our shoulders in chaturanga because 99.99999% of people, A, don't do it correctly, and B, are coming into this really intense pose without having the muscles to support them.
And by the way, for those of you who don't know what chaturanga is, it's kind of like doing a half a push-up, and it's quite full on. Yeah.
Some yoga teachers like will do 5-minute chaturangas, like, but as funny as that is, that's just not useful. And so what we want to do is also approach, you know, the things that we're doing. Why are we doing it? Is this really useful? And is this functional to a person in their daily life? So teaching something like triangle pose, but really focusing on those lateral obliques and getting them strong is really useful, because we need strong obliques for the movements that we go through in life, from picking up our kids or, you know, carrying the groceries in from the car. We need those strong oblique muscles to support our body. So things have to be functional, but we also need to be looking at like the pain, like your sciatic pain, and go, why is this pain here? You know, and what is actually causing the pain? And so now let's treat it rather than trying to put a Band-Aid on it, like a temporary Band-Aid, by stretching, you know, it out. Let's actually engage the muscles down there and start working on building more like strength through muscle activation. You know, your client or those people that are like, yeah, you know, I don't want to stretch. I did a survey recently about people about why they don't do yoga. And the two top things that these guys said was, one, that it's too painful. I just couldn't believe it. Like, a lot of people associate yoga with pain. And then number two, because they couldn't sit still. So the question, you know, that my invitation would be like, hey, you've got knee pain. Let me give you, you know, spend 15 or 20 minutes with you, and I'll show you some really cool stuff so that you can start to get rid of that pain, because you don't have to live with pain if you know, have a better support system in your body.
I mean, I suppose what you're sort of triggering in me is this sort of idea that we should be practicing yoga and finding where, you know, when that sort of stress that sort of pain arrives, to retreat away from it and work out why that is, and how we can counteract it. So I think, yeah, I think it's a and you've given this technique that you've given it a name: applied yoga anatomy and muscle activation, which I think is a nice yama kind of a word. It's quite well done. Like
Thank you. Ayama loosely, very loosely translated. It's kind of like you have to kind of draw a circle to get there, but it actually means a synonym for yama is moksha, which as spiritual freedom. And it, but I didn't actually, by the way, intentionally call it a yama. I called it applied yoga anatomy because I wanted to create a system where people could actually feel the anatomy. Like, so much of what you might have learned in your yoga teacher training is with many yoga teachers, they either do drawn coloring charts, with the muscles, or they have a teacher that's like, up at the front of the room doing things on a whiteboard. That's not functional. That's not experiential. That's not applied. So what we want to do is then start to understand, like, oh, when I'm coming into Trikonasana, I literally can feel my oblique muscles engaging. Or when I've got my hands behind the back, I'm now focused on engaging my rectus abdominis and pulling up at the pubic bone to feel the core muscles engage at the insertion point. So this is kind of like where I'm starting to teach people another pose, which, by the way, you asked me, like, what would be a solution for your sciatica. The number one pose, which I'm a huge, like, if you're going to teach one pose in every single yoga class, well, there's actually two I have. But the first one is Superman pose, which is when you're lying on or Shalabhasana, when you're lying on your stomach and you lift both the legs and the chest up as high as you can. And you start to lift that up. And what you do is you start to engage all of those lower back muscles. The brain goes, oh, there's back muscles here. And it's hard at first, but usually by day 3 or 4 or 5, people start going into it really effortlessly, because the brain has started to, if you want to say it like this, develop a relationship with those muscles. The brain knows where those muscles are in space, and you just start to feel all those muscles working. They're supporting the spine properly. And then guess what? The sciatic pain starts to disappear. The sciatic pain there is a result of instability, more likely than anything else. So we want to get those muscles working, holding those joints, holding the discs, everything in place properly, so that there's greater stability in the lower back. But then I tell people, come into it and bring your hands to your lower back as you do that. Now feel the longissimus really engaged. Do you feel that muscle like down there? That's the longissimus muscle, this global stabilizer in the lower back. And people are like, oh yeah, that's my longissimus. I can feel it starting to work properly. So I think that anatomy needs to be more applied. And then I called it muscle activation, of course, because we're constantly like, how do we bring some muscle activation into the way that we're practicing yoga? So then a yama was sort of the acronym of that, was like, oh, it's a yama. And I kind of started
lovely. I mean, and it works very nicely because, as I grow older, I mean, I've been teaching for 20 years now, and I probably practiced for 10 before that. But my practice used to be very much just like, I'm gonna do an amazing, whatever pose, all the poses, just do an amazing class and feel great, and not really worry about why I felt great, just enjoy the physical practice of it. But my practice has become so much more kind of mindful and spiritual and pleasing of myself, rather than, I very reluctantly introduce a pose that I don't really enjoy doing myself into my class. And we haven't done this for ages, but we kind of should. So here we go. Here's, Chaturanga Dandasana or something, for example. But I'm very much more about, using yoga as a tool to understand where you hold your stuff, where your, where your clinging on to things in your life, emotions, for example, in the hips, and in using it as an applied way of accessing our energy and chakras. That's my kind of, that's definitely the way that I'm going. And it feels to me as though this kind of little course correct in terms of is going to, because I haven't done any teacher training for however long, I'm not a member of the Iyengar Association anymore. I just go to lots of lovely teachers and and do my own research and work and my own practice and so on. But I think that this is definitely going to be something. I think this is I'm really hope that your message does get through into the wider circle, into the wider world of yoga. And hopefully, you're obviously doing teacher training down in Costa Rica, which is very envy making indeed. So, and one of these days I will come visit you. But before we, I want to just, I feel like we've talked so much about yoga, and we could do that for a really long time, but I think people might get a bit bored. So what I want to talk about is two things, and I can't decide which to go for first. Either one, how did you end up in Costa Rica? Or B, tell me about your other book, which I'm also really interested in. I'm going to tell people what the title is. It's called The Autobiography of a Naked Yogi.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. But obviously, it's my autobiography. It was published in 2015. I'm actually thinking about doing an updated version and changing the title. But it's, yeah, I mean, my life before Blue Osa. So how I ended up coming to Costa Rica was because I was leading a lot of yoga retreats, and I was taking my yoga students around the world, to just different places. And Costa Rica was one of the places on the list, and I just fell in love with Costa Rica. It's just so much nature. There's just so much beauty. Costa Rica is also very much a beach country. So, the people that don't live in the beaches always love to spend the weekends on the beach. It's a part of national pride here. And you can kind of feel that sort of like, let's enjoy life kind of spirit, which I really appreciated. And then one day, it was on the third retreat I was leading here. I was driving down the road and was with a group of friends, and I saw a Century 21 sign outside this property. And as I drove by, I looked through the gate, and there was this tunnel of bougainvilleas and hibiscus flowers. And at the end of the tunnel, you could see like the ocean, which was about 50 meters away. And it was that beautiful sort of blue, that turquoise blue kind of color mixed in with the red bougainvilleas. And I just was like, this is home. And it kind of just hit me like that awakening of prajna, that awakening of the sixth chakra, like, oh my God, like there's something here. And but I kind of like, I just put a little container around it in my mind. And then I talked to one of my students, Adam, who then became my business partner, and we bought the property and started Blue Osa. So
how gorgeous to have that freedom and that ability. Yeah, just wonderful when you're able to follow your dreams, when you're able to follow your intuition of like, this is it. How gorgeous. I'm so happy.
Yeah, it's really, really special. And now I think we're entering into our 14th year this coming year. So it's really great. I mean, we're very happy about, it took a while to get it going, and it's been a huge learning process, and my yoga is the thing that has saved me.
So good. And so you live there full time now, do you?
Yes, I live in Costa Rica full time. Yeah. Yeah. So the autobiography is sort of my story and how I got there. But it's also got a lot of other stuff in there too. Like I spent 10 years in New York. I started a gay men's yoga group. I also used to lead trips to India. And so there's a story in there about India and how I broke my leg up in the Himalayan mountains
Oof.
and had to get carried down. And in all of the kind of things that made me the person I am today. Autobiography of a Naked Yogi was also written with sort of this chicken soup for the soul-esque kind of flavor where I really was, wanting to tell the stories of my life, but in sort of what I learned at each point. And so there's kind of like these little lessons, if you will, along the way of my teachers and what they imparted to me. And part of writing my book was also a dedication to all of my teachers that, made me the person I am today. I have so much love and respect for them.
Yeah, that's amazing. God, I mean, that's a lot. That's a big old journey from New York. Started in Cornwall, as we discussed before we started. Canada, New York, Costa Rica. Heading south, you'll end up in Australia.
I wouldn't complain.
No, neither would I. That sounds like a happy place to be. Oh, listen, and we've been on for a little while now, and I just want to say thank you for sharing this. And I really hope that the yoga practitioners amongst my listeners, and a lot of the time I talk to people and it's about energetic things and it's healing and all that kind of thing. But as a yogi at heart, it's where I began. It's really fascinating to talk to you. And I talked to another yoga teacher recently as well, who actually was working very much in the same vein as you in terms of it was a not pushing yourself. And I think this is the theme, this is the thing that, because, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but when you pick up your phone and you're scrolling, and if you if you follow a few yogi people, you will start getting inundated with people doing these insane poses all over, like they drive me nuts. Some girl who is obviously a gymnast, doing some crazy back bend in the sea or on a rock or in the snow or something. And it makes me so, because that's not yoga.
Yeah.
That is not yoga. I mean, it's for her, for that particular girl who can do that thing, then that's yoga, that's fine, whatever. But that's not real life yoga. That's not why we practice yoga. And that's not what the real benefit of yoga is, just to be able to make some crazy impressive thing that shows your bum off really well. No, that's not.
No.
It's about finding a home in your own body. It's about finding release and finding peace. And it's about finding strength and health and balance. Stability.
Yeah, and I would also say too, like as I started the conversation and said, I'm really a huge lover of the chakras. I teach chakra, stuff all the time. And we very easily begin to integrate a lot of the chakra stuff. In the teacher training, I just led a 28-day immersion. The last week I spend in the chakras, but we're repeating a lot of the same muscle activations or approach, that engagement approach. We get stable, and now I can start to, yes, let's go into the heart center, yum. So when we approach it more from a stability standpoint, there's a greater, I believe, opportunity for us to be able to go inward and be able to activate those energetic centers. Which then ultimately we have more stability, we have more activation, and we have more awakening to manifest our life's purpose, which is, the goal of yoga, ultimately.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have really enjoyed our conversation, and I feel like I have benefited hugely as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. Can I just put a quick plug and say to your students that if they want to, they can go to my YouTube channel, and there's a lot of practices on there to start learning, doing these techniques. I have a lot of stuff on there, and
Just search Yogi Aaron, right?
yeah, Yogi Aaron, and then of course there's the book. So I highly, I recommend people to get the book and learn more about their body and how to have more stability.
I've already put it. Look, this is my Christmas list. I've just put stop stretching at the bottom there. It's literally on my list. And I will put all the links to the book and to your YouTube channel and to your Blue Oster website for the Costa Rica retreats. I'll put all of those in the show notes so everybody can go and have a good old look at you. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to speak with you, another yoga teacher. Thank you. Thank you for having this conversation.
You're so welcome.